So we kick off our half marathon recon series with a look at Southern Cross Drive. Now this has always been the feared climb of the Two Oceans half marathon, and I guess this year it still will be, but the addition of Edinburgh Drive to this year's route means that Southern Cross is no longer the only big climb that you'll do, and so I guess it's lost some of its exclusivity, but it remains, in my opinion, the challenging climb of the race because it's longer than Edinburgh Drive, it has sections that are quite a lot steeper than Edinburgh Drive as well, and it comes at 10.5 k's, and so it's a lot later in the race. And so for those three reasons, this is still the climb to beat in order to conquer the half marathon. I'm going to take you through a video clip of the climb in a moment, but I think the key thing in your mental approach to this climb is to understand that it's about 2 kilometers long. It takes you from just after the halfway mark up to 13, but the first few hundred meters are very gradual, so you can kind of work your way into the hill, and then when you hit the 11k mark you start the first section of climbing. Then it climbs up and then it levels off a little bit and then it kicks up again. So think of it as 2 phases with a gentle warm-up before you start the actual climbing part. And if you can do that and compartmentalize, break it down into segments, then you'll get to the top feeling fairly strong. And it's important to do that because from the top is another 8 kilometers to the finish, and it's not an easy 8Ks. And so if you feel good at the bottom, you have to just rein yourself in a little bit, control the tempo, control your intensity, and rather feel good at the top. And so I'm going to talk you through some of those key points now as we look at the climb. So the climb starts when you make this left-hand turn off Parish Road onto Southern Cross Drive. This happens just after the halfway mark of the race, and so you'll have a fairly good idea of what kind of legs and condition you have on the day. Now it's important to appreciate that the first few hundred meters, as I mentioned, are not that steep. It's a fairly gradual start to the climb, and that gives you the opportunity of easing in, holding back and relaxing. It's really important to recognize this because this gradual start can be a double-edged sword because it's very easy and tempting to push on and try and make up time now that you might lose later. The problem with that is that you do pay for it later on, probably in double. And so just hold yourself back, settle into a good rhythm at this point, and gear yourself for what comes up ahead. So you're about to go past the 11-kilometer mark here, and this is where the road starts to kick up ever so slightly. It still isn't especially steep, but it goes from the 2 or 3% that it was before up to about 4, perhaps 5% at times, and it's here that you're aware that you're on the climb and you know that your race is about to start. Now the way to visualize and approach Southern Cross Drive is to recognize that it has 2 fairly steep sections in it and a slightly more gradual section where you can partly recover. If you look ahead of you, that car going off the bend to the right there is tackling the first of those steep sections, and that starts as you go under the tree cover with the white wall to your left hand side. This is where the pace starts to drop and where you really have to focus on getting into a good rhythm. And recognizing rhythm is probably the most important thing about climbing a hill. At this stage, don't worry too much about your pace because you will be slowing down. Focus instead on your form, your breathing, and just relaxing, one step at a time, working on a nice comfortable rhythm that you know that you can sustain. You're coming up here to the 12-kilometer mark as you make this bend to the right, and that means that you have 1 kilometer to go. Soon after passing the 12k mark, you will see that the road starts to level out a little bit, and this provides some much needed reprieve for a few hundred meters before it kicks up again. So just gather yourself, there's one last effort to go, and then the climb will be conquered. So you're now on that more gradual section, which is certainly not flat, but it's at least down to 4 or 5% rather than 9% of earlier. It's here that you can gather yourself for the big final push over the final few hundred meters, knowing that the worst is behind you. The road then bends to the right, which signifies the third and final uphill pull of the climb. It's steep here, but not as bad as earlier, so push on through. When you see the road start to bend to the left, you know that you've done it. That's near the top, and from this point onwards, Southern Cross Drive is in the bag. As you made that sweep left, you'll have seen that the road actually drops downhill for a few hundred meters, and ahead of you, you'll see thousands of people waiting to welcome you to the top. This is where you join up with the ultramarathon, and you can look forward to your final 8 kilometers. You'll hit the 13k mark shortly after making this right-hand turn, and then you have a nice long descent before you hit the section up to Kirstenbosch, but we'll talk about that next time. And that's Southern Cross, a piece of cake when you are in a car, a little less easy when you are running it in the middle of a half marathon. But I think as daunting a climb as it is, and it's a difficult climb for every single person in the race, but if you segment it and if you compartmentalize it into that first section, followed by the section at the end with a gradual piece in the middle, I think it's doable. The most important things that I would stress are A, to manage your expectations. You can't run the same pace up Southern Cross Drive as you would run the rest of the race. And so you need to build that into your goal setting. So if your target, for example, is to run 5 minutes a kilometer, then you should expect and be happy to run 6 minutes a kilometer on Southern Cross Drive. And I would anticipate that, depending obviously how fast you are, you're probably going to lose between 45 seconds and a minute and a half per kilometer on this climb. And so plan for it, accept it, and don't get frustrated. I think the people who run themselves into trouble on the climb are the ones who are expecting too much of themselves, and they push too hard too early, and as a result they get caught out. Second point related to that is pace yourself. Instead of looking at it as a 2-kilometer climb, I would view it as a 5-kilometer section of the race, which includes descents afterwards. A lot of people go so hard up the hill that by the time they get to the 13k mark, they feel like their legs have exploded and they can't cash in. And so rather hold yourself back, get to the top of the hill feeling bouncy, energetic, and really good, and then go for it. 8Ks to go, you can push those 8. And then the final point is successfully running uphill. So much comes down to form and rhythm and relaxation. So don't hyperventilate, don't panic, just concentrate on keeping your form really solid, relax, breathe, and find a rhythm that you can climb at your own pace. And if you can do all those things, then Southern Cross Drive will be in the bag and your 2 Oceans will be a success. What we'll do next time is look at the section that takes you to Kirstenbosch. Quite a tricky section for a few reasons, and I'll talk you through those when we look at that section of the race next.